Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Here with my inaugural episode of Gaming Outside the Algorithm. And while I'm talking to you guys, I'm trying to riff because I am trying to get the word out on Discord too. Discord was not the quickest to launch. This is unfortunately oft the case. So what is the point of this whole podcast? For the last 4 years, mostly I have been podcasting, appearing on different podcasts, kind of in this circuit of Twitter and YouTube podcasts and the ongoing dialogue of gaming that is, I'll just call it, framed by the characteristics of that circuit. And there have been various reasons for that. I'm kind of entering a new period of life and my career where there's some other things that I want to focus on, and I kind of want to get out of that circuit. I talked earlier this year, I made a voice memo that I put up on Twitter, and I talked a little bit about how the conversation on Twitter and then on the connected YouTube podcast is too often in my mind about platforms, too often about Xbox versus PlayStation, PlayStation versus PC, PC versus Nintendo. And we don't do that on E2KG, on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. I kind of don't like doing it in general in terms of the content that I coordinate. And so I really want to kind of get out of that because it obstructs my ability to kind of research and read and listen to other content outlets, other formal media outlets that aren't centric to that. And it often results in kind of a lot of news discussion. I shouldn't say news discussion, a lot of discussion about things that are not actually news. And I actually want to get back to focusing primarily on news. And so this for me is kind of about having gone for full circle. You know, I started off, when we talk about audio and video content, I started off doing a podcast for a very specific forum and a very specific community that I was part of. And then some of us within that community decided to do a podcast to keep everybody else up on the news. Then I transitioned out of that to focusing on live streaming. And so I did that for several years. And then as I kind of transitioned out of that, I got pulled into this YouTube, Twitter podcasting circuit. Now I'm getting back to where I just want to kind of focus on E2KG enough to keep going, as well as this show, which I'm striving to make a thing that is not driven by the algorithm. And so when I talk about the algorithm, I talk about algorithmically driven social media. Twitter is algorithmically driven social media. It's a thing that, you know, the thing that predominantly comes by your windshield is primarily the stuff that is driven by the algorithm. And therefore your participation in a lot of cases is also driven by that algorithm. And so we kind of all get drug along by this wave. And what I talked about earlier this year is that the only way that I can think of, the only way that I know to ensure that you are not being influenced by that is to kind of extract yourself from it. And I did this before, maybe about a decade ago, when I was writing for a video game site and was doing reviews. And that staff got a little toxic with the staff leadership, as those people were preparing to kind of monetize and take that channel wider. I stepped away from that and went out on a shtick where actually for a couple of years I reviewed comic books. But before I went into that formally, I took about a year off where I just wrote. And I didn't post it really anywhere for anybody to really see or participate in or review or give me feedback. Actually, I posted most of it on my Facebook page. And so that's a little bit of kind of what this is. And so we're going to get this started, and when we are going to see how it goes. And I've got, lots of things to change and transition. Some of the branding is going to change, but by the same token, I've also got a lot of mechanical stuff that I need to kind of change out as well. So But tonight we've got several news stories to talk about, and I'll scroll some video from my YouTube channel while we are going through that. So this first news story is CD Projekt still plans to launch all 3 games in the new Siri-fronted The Witcher trilogy within a 6-year period. CD Projekt is sticking to its ambitious plan to release all 3 video games in the new Siri-fronted The Witcher trilogy within a 6-year period. Speaking during a recent financial call, joint CEO Michael Nowakowski said that future The Witcher video games should be delivered in a shorter period of time. That's because CD Projekt has switched to Unreal Engine 5 for the full production of not only The Witcher 4, but The Witcher 5 and 6. Here's Nowakowski's quote in full. Now, usually I don't read this much of the article, but there's about 2 paragraphs of quotes here directly from CD Projekt Red that I think it's pertinent for us to get through. We've been using UE5 for The Witcher 4 for almost 4 years now, and we're very happy with what we've achieved. I think you could have seen some of that with your own eyes with our tech demo reveal at Unreal Fest a couple of months ago, and we're very happy with the results of that as well. We've already said that, but I'm always happy to say it again. And we're happy with how the engine is evolving through the Epic team's efforts and how we are learning how to make it work with a huge open world game as The Witcher 4 is meant to do. In a way, yes, I do believe that further games should be delivered in a shorter period of time. As we had stated before, our plan still is to launch the whole trilogy within a 6-year period. So yes, that would mean we would plan to have a shorter development time between The Witcher 4 and The Witcher 5, between The Witcher 5 and 6, and so on. Sorry, one thing I want to do is I do want to bring up a little music here in the background, and for people watched the Logic files when I was also doing another solo cast. I do need to periodically take some breaks to grab some coffee and something to drink, so that will be going on here as well. A couple notes that I thought of after reading through this. So it's been a decade since The Witcher 3. So it's a pretty ambitious plan to be talking about releasing all of these within a span of 6 years for 3 titles. Still, given that they would all be built on the same engine and using the same assets, you can kind of see and maybe start to believe in the Call of Duty-ification of the production pipeline if they have multiple dedicated teams working on each title, which I think they do. And that really means that Team 2 maybe actually has 4 years to work on their title, and Team 3 actually has 6 years to work on their title if they're all working concurrently, i.e. in parallel. So you start asking questions, what could go wrong? One thing that could go wrong is you could have a major disruption or pivot or shift in the narrative that could lead to rework. So assuming nothing technical goes wrong, you could have something where in storytelling or in continuity, somebody messed something up, right? Somebody didn't think about something, or there's a nit out of place that wasn't anticipated. So, that type of thing could come up, and then you could have a lot of rework to do, right? And that could cause you to kind of step off of schedule. A thing that could happen, because they're having this dependency on Epic, you could have something uncovered in the underlying technology, i.e. a UE5 item that requires a change out of the technology that you're building on. And so, we have multiple instances in the past few years that you can think of. We're going to talk a little chips tonight, and obviously, and we were talking on the last episode of Enough to Keep Going, and a friend of that show, Ramon Terrell, stopped by and was asking for, hey, can you give me a quick explainer on cache and 3D V cache and why it's important? And one of the things we started talking about was predictive computing, and we have these instances in the last few years. I can't remember exactly what the names of the bugs or the vulnerabilities that were discovered, but we had these problems that were oriented around the way predictive computing had been built in the microcode that went into the Intel chips. I think the Meteor Lake series, and how there were then problems with those 13,000 series and 14,000 series chips that would cause the chips to degrade over time. So that is the type of thing that I'm talking about. A quality issue that is an escape that gets into the production product that people are building on that isn't discovered for years. And then when it is discovered, it can have a huge disruptive effect on people who are building on that technology. So that type of thing could happen, and it's kind of what happens when you're oriented around this notion of you have one point of failure, a single point of failure. So what's interesting that's going on here, and I think we've seen it from the UE tech demo that went out over Summer Games Fest. Obviously, Epic and CD Projekt Red are working very close together. I'm pretty confident Epic has put skin in on the game in terms of money, in terms of the level of coordination that they're providing. I believe it seems clear that they're providing a higher level of direct support and engineering support directly to CD Projekt Red than they are to some other teams. I don't know if CD Projekt has paid them for some of it, but whatever. Obviously, Epic benefits from that because it's their reputation, it's the brand's reputation, it's the product's reputation, and so they benefit from that as well. But because you have this single point of failure as a foundational environment that you're building on, those are the types of things that could blow your project up. And blow up multiple projects if they're all chained together in this production pipeline in the way that the Call of Duty production pipeline train is, in a similar way to the way the MCU product train is. To throw an analogy in there of all those visual effects studios where there's tons of pressure on those visual effects studios that they cannot miss schedule, because then it's a whole domino effect of what everybody else in the MCU is working on. So you could have something like that. Now, is that a big thing to be concerned about? There are probably a few others that I'm not mentioning or didn't think of, and it may seem far-fetched that those things could occur. They're probably low on the probability scale. But in the art of risk management, we characterize risk by both probability and impact. And so you can have a very, very small risk that is not likely to happen, but it has a tremendous impact if that risk is realized. And so when we calculate risk in program management, there's this whole matrix where where it winds up on the matrix is based on what is the probability cross-reference with what is the impact, and then we quantify that impact, right, in dollars usually. And so again, these things may not be super probable, but the problem is that if they were to occur, the impacts could be huge. So that being said, still, overall, I think this sounds like a good format. We have so many fans of franchises and platforms that often can wait a decade or more when they have something good. It then takes like a decade for them to get yet another good thing, right? To get another iteration of that thing that they love. I've always said that it's always been weird to me how people can fall in love with a thing in gaming. Grand Theft Auto, a platform like Xbox, the Half-Life franchise. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And then, fans sometimes will stand around waiting for some unspoken promise, consistently believing that every time they hear the smallest titter that a thing is happening, they're convinced that it is. Oh my God, Half-Life 3 is coming out. Oh my God, like the next Xbox is coming out, it's going to be more powerful than the thing. Oh my God, Grand Theft Auto, like there's a Nintendo Direct, whatever, like all these things. And I remember always thinking when that happens, that's not me. If I'm sitting around waiting on a thing and a thing never materializes, I just move on and I stop waiting on that promise. So it's always kind of seemed strange to me. So therefore, this kind of release cadence that balances the notion of the forever getting worse development timelines that come along, and then the grind and crunch that comes along when teams are on annualized franchises. Things that what I call a death march project or a death march property. These things are good because you're going to get gamers that are going to get a thing delivered within a chunk of their lives. I don't know how everyone else's life has been, but I can remember specific phases of my life, roughly 5 to 10 years at a time, where like I'm this person, I'm in this situation, this is what is normalized for me, and then those things change. And so the way the industry is right now, you can get a thing when you are one person, and by the time you get another thing, you may be a completely different person. You may be in a completely different situation. So I think overall that's good. It'll let those people who are long-term lifetime gamers experience an actual full arc of a video game story told as a trilogy within a decade, and I think that's pretty huge. So that's pretty good stuff. Fingers crossed that they're able to execute this and nothing catastrophic happens. So good luck to CD Projekt Red. Next news story I want to talk about is how voting has opened for the Game Awards Player Voice category. This news story over on Kit Guru. Try and zoom that in a little. By Yao Silva. The voting process for the Players' Voice Awards is structured as a 3-round tournament designed to whittle down the initial pool of 30 nominees. The first round is currently underway and will conclude on December 3rd at 2 a.m. British Standard Time. In this initial, I don't know why they use that time format. I guess it's where the website is out of. I actually don't know I assume that that's very close to UTC/GMT. So for us in the US, that should be 5 hours earlier. So that would be December. That would have been tonight at 9 p.m. I don't know if that's right. So that I'm not sure about. I did get my votes in before 9 p.m. So hopefully voting's not closed already. In this initial phase, users can log into the official Game Awards website via their social accounts or email to select their top 10 favorites from the long list. The nominees include heavy hitters such as Battlefield 6, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, and Death Stranding 2, alongside older live service titles like Genshin Impact and Warframe. Once the first deadline passes, the field will be narrowed down to the top 10 titles for round 2, which is scheduled to kick off on December 4th at 5 p.m. BST. At that stage, voters will be limited to selecting just 5 titles. The competition intensifies for the third and final round, starting December 8th, where the remaining 5 nominees will face off for the single winning spot. The full list of nominees for the first round of the Game Awards 2025 Players' Voice Award voting can be found below. We'll go a little bit through this list, but not through the entire thing. Pretty heavy hitters here. Arc Raiders, Battlefield 6, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, Death Stranding 2, On the Beach, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Doom: The Dark Ages, Ghost of Yotai, Indiana Jones: The Great Circle, Kingdom Come, Deliverance 2, Mario Kart World, and Wuthering Waves. And we'll hit some of these other titles as we kind of go through the discussion here. So I can't say that this is a category that I always really pay attention to, or that I even vote on all the time. But I can definitely say that I don't entirely understand the voting process, and what I mean is from how they determine what games get into the nomination list, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And I don't necessarily agree with the arbitration process. The quantification of the stages, right, the 10 down to 5 to 1, that makes sense to me. So when you go from a field of 30 down to a field of 10 and then down to a field of 5 and limiting the number of picks for the individual voters, I totally understand, and that I'm okay with. I can't say that I'm totally okay with the live service living games that are allowed to compete alongside the single-player, single-point release titles. And let me explain why. What that means is that a title that has been garnering and currying favor amongst a loyal fan base for multiple years could, I'm not saying it would, but we're going to look at the history of this, but could pick up a Player's Voice Award. And I'm not sure that that's really the signal that we really want to send. I don't know that it's really quote-unquote fair for a game that comes out in 1 year, it's got one shot, it's got 6 months on the market or whatever, to stack up next to some live service game that has been around for 2, 3, 4 years. Okay, and Techie Egg 33K says doing bedtime. Hope I can swing back and watch later. Yeah, thanks a lot, Techie Egg. I'm actually not expecting a ton of people to show up for these things live. Definitely not the first one. This is a little bit of a science experiment as we get things going, but by all means, I do think that some people will stop by and watch the VOD. So you're definitely in that pool, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming through when you got bedtime. I remember those nights. I assume you mean you're doing bedtime for little ones. So thanks so much for swinging through and dropping a comment, and feel free to come by and If there's something you don't like, feel free to comment on that as well. So anyway, that's my primary kind of nit with this structure and this format. And initially, when I as I was reading this, and I hit the realization that that's there was a thing that was bothering me as I was reading this earlier tonight, and once I realized what it was and I started to unwind it, I was thinking I don't think that's actually happened before. I don't think a live service game has picked up the win. This award category first came into being in 2019, and Ghost of Tsushima got the initial pickup. But actually, looking back at history, nothing like a pure esports title has really walked away with the trophy. At least that's what I thought. Even after I read the list of the winners beforehand, there's levels. As Doc Dark says, there's levels to this. I unwound a piece at a time. But the winners do tend to be games with a very long service content tail. They tend to be these kind of forever games in many cases. Again, we only really have 5 years of data. And a couple of them have actually been kind of those weird single-player games that wind up, they're weird kind of single-player, maybe co-op multiplayer games, right? Not necessarily PvE, but they do have PvP components to them. And they've been ones that have actually made it into those categories that are normally associated with pure live service games. I can't remember exactly what the category is, but I guess there's a community service, or it's the description is an award that's given to the title IP or whatever that pays the most attention and takes does the most to take care of its community. Hey Thrifty, thanks so much for swinging through. I appreciate you. I will be on Thrifty show tomorrow night, so by all means, anybody stopping by here should definitely stop by there. Not because of me, but because it's Thrifty show, and Thrifty does a great show. So you should definitely go check his out, even on weeks when I'm not there. And so there does tend to be this trend of types of titles that get this award. So the winners in the past few years have been Baldur's Gate 3, and these aren't in any particular order. I'd read the winners before, and I was trying to initially write them down from memory, and so the last couple were the ones I couldn't remember and I had to loop back. The winners have been Baldur's Gate 3, which again, yes, it's primarily positioned as a single player game. It does have some multiplayer elements to it, but it is one that has kind of wormed its way into the nominee of a category of a game, that normally you would think of as a pure live service game in that community service award. Then Genshin Impact, definitely a live service game. Ghost of Tsushima, Halo Infinite, definitely a live service game. And then Black Myth Wukong. So again, 3 out of the 5 have been, I should say that 2 out of the 5 have definitely been live service. Baldur's Gate 3 has been one that the TGAs would have you kind of think of as a live service game. I'd throw Cyberpunk 2077 in there because it also got an award that one year for community service or whatever. So I would say gas games, or games that are very similar to gas games and resemble them in some ways, have been favored, I think, over the last 5 years of this award. And so for me, it's super weird. And then you look at the nominees this year, and this is where kind of the trend starts to really mount up. So these are games that are ostensibly going for favorite game for gamers, right? This year, and you have something like Delta Force that makes it in with a nomination. Now, Delta Force, which is a game with very, very, very rough edges, and not a ton of terrible buzz around it. I'm pretty sure it has mixed reviews on Steam. But admittedly, it maintains a very high concurrent player count. And I play Delta Force. But I will also be the first to tell you, Delta Force is a game that has super rough edges around it, and I don't know that in my mind it sits right. This is a game being nominated into a category of, where gamers are going to vote for what their favorite game of the year is. Something about that just seemed weird. In fact, I would dare to say I'm pretty sure that there are other games that have executed and stuck the landing better than Delta Force that I question why they aren't in nomination for this category. So, okay, so at any rate, we'll see how this whole thing turns out. In this first round, I personally had more slots for voting than I really had titles that I natively wanted to raise up, because I've spent like a good chunk of time playing them. So I definitely fired a few alibi rounds that were just like the next closest games that I had some relationship with, that I also felt, were okay to be raised up. And Thrifty mentions, you guys should come by for me. I appreciate that, Thrifty. It's more flattering than I can say. And Nate mentions I actually stopped voting at 8. Yeah, I don't know how I felt about just not voting. Number one, I wasn't sure exactly how the web page was going to function. I didn't know that it was going to accept less than 8. So I had enough. I didn't out and out. I'm checking my list now. I'm going to tell you guys what I voted for. I did not out and out pick anything that I had not played. I would say that there are a couple of games in here that I would not have voted for. Were there other games in nomination, or had I played other games, right? So what I voted for was Arc Raiders, Expedition 33. Look, I don't mind telling everybody right now, I'm voting Expedition 33 all the way through. Like, a lot of this for me was just academic, because the only game that really mattered in this list to me was Clair Obscur Expedition 33. So I voted for Arc Raiders, Expedition 33, Death Stranding 2, Delta Force, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Doom: The Dark Ages, Ghost of Yotai, Helldivers 2, Kingdom Come, Deliverance 2, and No Man's Sky. And this is another thing that, look, I am the first one to go through the history of Hello Games and No Man's Sky, and applaud them for the stick-to-itiveness of that game, and talk about how I personally feel like PlayStation oversold that game just as much as Hello Games did, maybe arguably a little more. But I always compliment that team about how they just went quiet and put their heads down and just went to work, which is yet another work ethic that I would strongly advise certain platform holders to do, is maybe just put your head down and do the work and stop talking so much. But and Intel has said the same thing, right? When the problems that they've had with the Arc GPUs, they said we're not going to go out here and rah-rah and pom-pom and throw a bunch of shade at NVIDIA and AMD and talk about how things they do make it hard for us to be successful, right? We're just going to put our heads down and do the work. I've several podcasts, I've gone through that whole years of history and but I don't know that they should be in this category. And then my problem is okay, so this is as I go through the list and why it just bugs me. You're going to have more people who have played No Man's Sky over the years than people who will have played Ghost of Yotai and Donkey Kong Bonanza, and that just feels slanted. It also stands out how to me, going through the history, how in the world did Halo Infinite win when theoretically it would have won off of the multiplayer, and the lack of really hitting consistent seasonal turnover is what really tanked that game. I would actually say there were less problems with that game in the single player campaign. Look, you can talk about whether or not you liked Halo Infinite, whether it stuck the landing with you, whether it hit. It probably didn't hit emotional drum beats, obviously, in the way that an Expedition 33 did, or even I would say this year's Ghost of Yotai did. I don't know that that's what Halo is supposed to do. Halo to me is more so supposed to be kind of like a Michael Bay or a Zack Snyder movie than it's supposed to make you feel something. But my big thing is that they did not hit on all cylinders with the multiplayer, and yet that game walked away with the Player's Voice Awards. And when I go back to the root of that, I don't necessarily put that on players. And there have definitely been these things where players mount up kind of social media campaigns, and they rally the troops, and they get a bunch of people to go and vote. I don't think that's unfair. I think to me it's more so what is the arbitration process behind the curtain? Who determines and filters and puts these things through the sieve that determines whether or not they get on the landing page in the first place? That to me is just a little weird. So that is that topic in the bag. we are going to move on to third news story in the rundown. We have 8 news stories in the rundown total tonight, just to kind of prepare you. I am trying to get through this quick because I want to go play some No Man's Sky on the Nintendo Switch 2 before I go to bed, and I am very, very exhausted. I am going to take a quick break to grab some coffee, so give me just 1 second. Okay, and I don't want to take time to listen to the live feed of the live stream. So so you guys who are in the chat, if the mic is too loud or if the music is too loud, if you can please let me know. I know Thrifty did a really good job last time I did the logic files of mentioning that the music was just a tad too loud, so I have tried to adjust for that. So this news story over on Game Rant. 1 month later, Arc Raiders is still dominating on Steam. This news story by, I can't even see this guy's name, Josh Cote. And we're going to go through this one in a lot of detail. So this will probably be another article that I read almost the entire thing. It has officially been 1 month since the release of Embark Studios' hit extraction shooter Arc Raiders, and it is still holding its position as one of Steam's most popular titles. According to SteamDB, Arc Raiders is still one of Steam's top sellers, most wishlisted titles, and most played games over 30 days since its launch. When Arc Raiders was released on October 30th, 2025, it was certainly anticipated, but it's likely few expected it to explode as much as it did. Within a little over a week after its launch, it had already peaked at more active players than Battlefield 6 and wasn't even phased by the arrival of Call of Duty Black Ops 7. Soon after that, it has proven to be something of a phenomenon, especially considering how niche, though decreasingly so, extraction shooters have been historically. While Steam player counts aren't everything in a cross-platform game like Arc Raiders, they still offer a glimpse into the extent of its popularity. A closer look at its peaks over its first month helps show how that interest has both risen and settled over time. You guys can see the numbers up on the screen. I'm not gonna call them out. Their all-time peak was about 482K, and then their low was about 355K. So they've bounced back and forth kind of within a band of about 130K, and they have been more towards the side of 500K overall than below it. According to SteamDB's data, Sunday is Arc Raiders' most popular time to play, with each of its weekly peaks occurring then around 8 and 9 UTC, or about between around 3 or 4 p.m. on the East Coast in the U.S. Beginning on November 2nd, just a few days after it was released, Arc Raiders saw its first peak reach 355K players on Steam alone, with the following Sunday seeing nearly a 30% increase in that count when it hit 461K. November 16th, 2025 marked the biggest day for Arc Raiders yet, with its peak reaching an all-time high of 482K, and while the next Sunday only peaked at 449K, that is less than a 7% drop and still nearly 27% higher than its first peak. Now, a month from launch, Arc Raiders is still number 3 in Steam's top sellers, though it could technically count as number 2, right behind Counter-Strike 2, with the top most seller being the Steam Deck. It has also been consistently higher daily player counts. Okay. And then there's a lot of discussion about, why people are still playing it. Let's get into some of my assessment on this topic. So this is great to hear, although I do say, and I always caution people, there are certain thumb rules that I have for whether or not I feel a live service game has crossed the mark. You got to give it at least 6 months. You have to let it get into its second season, or it's what I call its second major content drop or revisional update, before you start running around talking about calling it a success. So in my opinion, no one should be talking about Arc Raiders as a huge success right now. I think you can say it has had a great launch. I wouldn't say it's successful because we just don't know yet, and we have to have room for it to see if it's going to keep its legs. when I talk about second major content drop or revisional update, what I mean is, not just like a map or a raid, but like something where they drop a big content drop, but also they revise a bunch of things along with it, right? They tweak what's allowable, they nerf some weapons, they raise some other weapons up. Basically, the types of changes that are commensurate with what for another game would be a seasonal update if that game were doing seasons, right? And that's how I try and kind of have parity between a game that's doing seasons versus a game that's not. And this is a game that's not going to do strict seasons, kind of like the Ark Survival model, and kind of like the way Destiny 2 was before it actually started doing seasons. So this is kind of where we are with Ark Raiders. A couple of things that I want to point out in the article that I violently agree with. The legs of Ark Raiders and the stability that we see in extraction shooters. So we've got Delta Force, Arena Breakout, Infinite, and this game, Ark Raiders, all three of which I'm playing right now, shows that this genre is having much more uptake and adhesiveness than I anticipated. So if you go back a year ago and listen to me on podcasts, I would have definitely said extraction shooters are overblown. People are like establishing way too high expectations of what they're going to do on the market. People going after, like, I felt it was like the battle royale glut happening, where 2017 Fortnite blew up, and if you watched like the E3, Summer Game Fest, all those kind of shows in 2018, like every other dev that came onto the stage was talking about they were launching a battle royale, and that just led to like a highway of death, like littered with like the carcasses of all these battle royales that never made it. And I thought we were heading for the same thing with extraction shooters. And we may still well be, but I didn't think any extraction shooter was going to do well or blow up. I felt that they were so punishing and so oriented around, seal clubbing, trying to think of a nice way to say, not good players, not even noobs, but just people that like aren't great at PvP. But I think this recent round of extraction shooters has proven to me, and I've spent more time playing them than I previously had, that there's room, that there's space in there, that you can be a smart player and not get yourself into as much trouble. And then there's also just part of kind of the uptake and approach. Like I think one of the things you have to get over in extraction shooters, you just need to understand you're going to lose gear. It's going to happen. Like it's kind of like when you buy that new pair of sneakers, like in that first time that they get scuffed, until you hit that age where when you buy, you get to a point where you buy sneakers and they get scuffed, and you're like, sneakers always get scuffed, right? And you just shrug it off, right? But when you're younger and you buy new sneakers and they get stuffed, it's like this whole like falling out thing. Or even a car, even when you buy a new car and it gets a scratch, right? You get to an age where you're just like, car was going to get scratched at some point, whatever. So you're going to lose gear. Just get over it. In fact, quite frankly, the sooner it happens to you, probably the better it is. But my point is that there's room and elasticity in these systems, and I really like a lot of the systems that I'm seeing in extraction shooters where, they're providing daily kits. So should like the worst happen and you just go on 5 or 6 raids and lose all of your gear, they give you these daily packs, on every week. They refresh, so you will always have gear to go out. It may be crappy gear. You may lose, your precious, like the golem, but there's always stuff being replenished. So I think these things are going to have some legs on the market, and in fact, I even think it bodes for a better perspective for Marathon than I anticipated. And I'm not saying that to codify whether or not I think Marathon is going to whether or not Marathon is going to be a good game. I'm saying that to codify, I think the market is more ripe for an extraction shooter, particularly one that comes with a bunch of funding from, what was at one point thought of as a marquee studio, with a bunch of financial backing, right, from a big platform owner, and a healthy marketing budget. So that extraction shooter may not be Marathon. It may be a different game. But I think the market, like I said, a year ago, I would have told you you're not even pointing this thing in a market that really has that potential. But I think I've come around on the idea now that it does. Interestingly enough, I haven't heard boo about Escape from Tarkov, which was kind of like, I'm sure it wasn't the absolute historical first extraction shooter, but it was the first extraction shooter that was really popular and in the zeitgeist and had a lot of mind share. I haven't heard a thing about it since it formally launched on Steam. I did go and check it earlier tonight before the show, and it is sitting at mixed reviews. I didn't have a chance to check the actual percentage, but they've obviously got some work to do. So it's very interesting that, you know, the title that really kind of set off this whole, I don't want to call it a revolution, but this, you know, populist trend of extraction shooters is the one that is not doing well in the face of, you know, arc raiders just blowing up. The other thing that I want to note actually has nothing to do with extraction shooters, but it's the fact that the Steam Deck continues to be number one above all software sales on those Steam charts. And so if you've ever looked at those Steam charts are revenue. So when you see that, you might say, yeah, well, they're selling obviously for way more than the price of a single title game. And while that's true, what it means to me is also, you know, I would think games per, you know, a title sell at an incredibly faster rate in comparison to the Steam Deck. And so, you know, even a game that at $60 or $70 a pop is selling, you know, 6, 7 to 10 copies for every one Steam Deck, I would think overall that pace would be much greater for a given title, and I would expect when very popular titles land for them to easily overtake the Steam Deck, particularly now that we are going on 4 years since this thing launched, right? Because it launched in like January of 2022. I think what that means to me is that, number one, I think how well we think the Steam machine is going to do actually bears out when you look at and consider that the Steam Deck is still the top selling thing by revenue on Steam. That means people haven't stopped buying these things. Like this whole notion that like these Windows handhelds have come out and have put like a chilling effect on the Steam Deck. And you know, people aren't going after it. Now people are in the mode, like I'm in the mode where like I wouldn't recommend anybody to buy it. I've had people ask me, I'm not telling people to buy a Steam Deck right now. I'm saying just wait, like unless you really need a handheld, just wait and see. I'm sure that by the next year, by the time the Steam machine drops, we will, I believe, have a firmer indication of what Valve is intending to do about the Steam Deck product line and when they're going to refresh it. But I think this notion that sales have tailed off to a trickle, to me, appears to not be true whatsoever. And I also think that this notion that's going around that only about 5 million Steam Decks have been sold, I'm starting to kind of think that that's suspect as well. I'm starting to think that that number is underestimated. And I think, like I said, the potential for the Steam machine is as great as I've been saying it was. Greater than maybe other people have been saying it was. I'm not revising my estimates because my estimates were already pretty high on what I thought the sell-through was going to be on the Steam machine, so I don't feel the need to go higher. But I am very caught off guard and very impressed by the fact that the Steam Deck is still experiencing a lot of sell-through, more than I anticipated it was. I thought it would have gone pretty quiet by now. So a couple comments from Enate here. Enate says, I was actually looking at a Steam Deck OLED for $350 today on OfferUp. And then he also mentions, yeah, I keep seeing people get new Steam Decks all the time. And then mentions, I think the more expensive alternatives are super low, though. Yes, yeah, no, I would agree. Yes, I'm not applying that to all handhelds by any means. I don't think those things are selling well at all. I'm really amazed at this thing that, you know, I've tried to help and codify and define like what the Steam Deck is. It's not a standalone device. It's not we make these assessments of what the Steam Deck is and really what the Steam machine is going to be. And I keep saying like the primary purpose of these things is they're an extension device, just like the PlayStation Portal is for the PlayStation. It extends your experience of the PlayStation beyond the bounds of where your console is physically fixed. And for a lot of people, like I talk about in here all the time, I say, you know, what do these devices do for me? These devices are the things that allow me to access gaming and connect to my gaming fabric when I am not here in the man cave. That is the reason they exist. If I'm in my man cave, then there's no purpose for them. And so that's the use case that you really need to lean into, and that really needs to drive the uptake of these things. And I think for some devices they are. I think for other devices they aren't. Now, that being said, there's still people who are absolutely being introduced to like PC gaming through a handheld because they were PC gaming curious, but they weren't willing to buy like a $1,500 PC. But a $500, $650 handheld device for some a $1,000 handheld device, that has been an acceptable entry point for a lot of them. Okay, let me grab some more coffee and then let's go on to the next story. Probably gonna pick up the pace here because most of these stories I don't have scripted commentary. Really, Nate mentions, Morgan is waiting to see the price of the Steam machine to jump in. Yeah. Okay, so this is what I'm going to try to get through. I am not an expert on the British government budgetary cycle. I'm really good at the US one, not so much on the British one. What does the autumn budget mean for UK games companies? UK and TIGA TIGA have called upon the government to make improvements to tax relief for the industry. This news story over on GameIndustry.biz by Alex Forbes Calvin. UK trade bodies UK and TIGA have both called on the government to improve the tax relief available to the games industry after the measure went unaddressed in this week's autumn budget. The industry received only a brief mention in Wednesday's announcement. Chris Buchan, tax advisor for the media and creative sector at Moore Kingston Smith, tells GameIndustry.biz these are all minor changes. Video games tax relief specific changes are limited to administrative changes regarding companies transitioning from video games tax relief (VGTR), the old regime, to video games expenditure credits (VGEC), potentially applying where there is significant non-UK expenditure, and a clarification regarding payments for the transfer of relief between group companies. So I won't get into too much details. I'm just going to say what I think I understand. The reason I put this in the rundown is because I do listen to Christopher Dring's game business show when I can, and he has talked about this, and I had an opportunity when I was doing some freelance work for VentureBeat, GamesBeat, for Dean Takahashi, and a lot of the investors, I sat in on a talk with Rami Ismail and some other people who are investment managers at venture capital firms, at private equity firms, and it was a discussion about the regionality of game development and how, like, a lot of these companies, they try and identify like hotbeds of game development. When they see, you can kind of put it on a heat map and you can see where talent is kind of blowing up, right, geographically. And then what they all try and do is they try and identify where that's happening, and then they try to swarm to it, right, and get there before everybody else does. Ukraine was one of these areas before the Ukraine-Russia war. We've had periods where things were like blowing up in Turkey and things like that. And then there was a whole period like in the Russian-Ukraine war where the gaming industry was actually trying to shift and figure out, well, okay, so this bloom that we saw going off in the Ukraine, obviously that's not happening there. Now we have to figure out like where it's going to happen next. Christopher Dring, in a couple of his episodes, I've heard him talk about how one of the reasons why you hear about all of these development companies that are out of the UK, and I don't remember all of them perfectly well, but obviously Psygnosis, I believe Codemasters is out of the UK, Playground Studios is out of the UK, but a lot of these studios are are fertilized and kind of grown in the UK because the tax relief credits and other business incentives that the UK government provides are specifically targeted to support the video games industry. Much more so than we see in America, right? Like in America, like I don't know that we have any tax clauses written in our tax code that specifically benefit game development studios, but the UK does. And it's a very big deal. Like it's a very well-known, outspoken topic, as you can see here. And so, from what I understand, it is the UK government had a previous regime that was based on providing tax relief, but now the new regime is based on how much of your expenditure is actually taking place in the UK. So if you're a big UK studio, and this studio is not a UK studio, but I'm going to use the analogy. It's geographically displaced, but I'm going to use the analogy because I'm a little more familiar with it. But you look at Avalanche Studios, the studio that was working on Contraband. That studio is one where like they are headquartered in, I can't remember where it is, Finland, somewhere in Scandinavia. But then they have 3 or 4 satellite studios scattered around the world. And so that is the type of thing where, so if they're working on a project, let's just say the project is $100 million. That's true, but like that $100 million is not all necessarily being expended in their native country, right? That $100 million is maybe going to other studios outside, or in the case where you have like a Crystal Dynamics was supporting the initiative. That studio could be geographically displaced, and because you're outsourcing a lot of the development, so it's not actually taking place in your country. So, obviously, one of the big topics here in their budget battle that's going on, like it is here in the U.S., there's significant intensity around getting this thing right and addressing some of the things that they feel are shortfalls in this code, and it is becoming less incentivizing than it was before. That's the pickup that I've understood from Chris Strings is that the incentives for businesses were better before, I believe, and now in order to really get to an equitable state, there's more administrivia and more qualifications that you have to go through, and the concern that's been expressed is that this is going to cause a slowdown in the amount of build out and investment that's going on in setting up game development studios in the UK, and it's going to cause those things to come to a crawl. So there is concern about getting this right. And what the greater impact is to like the rest of the gaming industry, and I mentioned a few studios that are prominent studios within the fabric of a given platform owner. PlayStation has studios in the UK. Xbox has studios in the UK. So it'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on and see whether or not it impacts some of the giants. We'll go on to the next news story here. And my screen is taken over by an ad, so. That was the problem. I couldn't see the X. Okay, next news story. God of War and Half-Life fans huff the hopium side by side as Jeff Keighley shares cryptic tease. And I reckon a lot of you have seen this. So this news story over on Destructoid by Andrzej Barovich. The entire gaming industry is merely a farce, a place where people gather not to play games, but to hope for new ones. I think he's talking about gaming social media. It's the ultimate assembly of tinfoil hatters who predict, decrypt, and huff and puff the hopium. And this time it's the Half-Life and God of War fans doing it together. After Jeff Keighley, the host of the Game Awards, shared 2 cryptic messages portraying some sort of demonic portal in a desert in the middle of nowhere, fans were quick to conjure up hype for what no one seems to know, but some think it's a new God of War game that is to be announced at the upcoming TGAs. Now, I'll try and go through this, quickly without going into all of the detail. I have to nuke some stuff here thanks to Safari. Actually, hope this works. Yeah. I hope we're not able to see the graphics when I go into reader mode. Just kill some of the distracting items. Okay, so these are the two pictures that have been circulated. I'll go through kind of some of the thoughts that popped into my mind when I first saw these. First of all, much ado has been made about this map of out in the desert, out in California. Obviously, geomarking where the statue is below it. That's a thing that was weird to me. It seems like there's been lots of discussions about the statue, and I feel like I didn't hear people connecting the dots. Like, you do understand the statue is geolocated right where that marker is on the map. And so much ado was made about the fact that this road over here on the left-hand side is named Yucca Mesa, and the name of the road is on the map. But the name of the road along the south border of the map, which is 29 Palms Highway, is also there. 29 Palms Highway is the highway that goes to the Marine Corps base in that area. I'm not sure exactly how far. I don't know how far this intersection is from the Marine Corps base, but that's the thing that popped out to me. Less so the Yucca Mesa thing, but the 29 Palms Highway. And then there's much ado about the statue, which, lots of people are better experts on the lore than I am. So I've heard a few different opinions. I've heard that lots of people feel like the armor and some of the creatures they're seeing are reminiscent of things in God of War Ragnarok. I have heard one person passed to me an opinion that was rendered by people on Twitter. Brap mentioned to me today that some people now think the armor is reminiscent of Elden Ring. I'm not sure. I'm less certain about whether or not this means a God of War thing. What I'm absolutely going to say, this is not Half-Life 3. I don't know where this is coming from, and this has been going rampant since the whole Steam machine was mentioned. There's so many no's and don'ts. I don't even know that I can keep them straight. No, Valve does not need to launch Half-Life 3 alongside the Steam machine. It's not necessary. There's been some when I said that they didn't do that with the Steam Deck. There's been some mention of some nickel and dime penny ante stuff that they put out with the Steam Deck. No, those don't constitute new releases. Those don't constitute flagship titles. Those don't constitute system sellers. Those weren't games that were released on the old. I mentioned this a few podcasts ago. I can't remember exactly where. But this old formula that we used to have of the big five that you had to have whenever you launched a console, that you had to have a big racing game that was kind of the tech demo of all the glory of your console. You needed to have, way back in the day, you needed to have a platformer. I think that's for a time was superseded by a shooter. But you needed to have a platformer or then a shooter that was also kind of like a tech demo that showed off a lot of your graphics muscle that was available on this new console. You needed a third-person action adventure game or a big RPG, and so on and so forth. You needed a big sports title, yada yada yada. That is not what Valve did with the Steam Deck. I don't believe that's what they're doing with the Steam machine. They don't need to. The Steam machine comes with a pre-installed library of thousands of games, and the target audience for that device is people who have hundreds of games already in Steam. The market for the Steam machine, I keep describing it as it is an aggregate of a niche of niches, right? And so you have this skinny group of demographic of people who, like I said, already have hundreds of games on Steam, and they're going to fall in these weird buckets of why it makes sense for them to get it. Either there's somebody who is on a rig that was a good rig at the time that they got it, but they haven't upgraded yet because they have been dulled by the equivalent graphics card now being an $800 graphics card, right? $900, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 graphics card. And they've said, yeah, I want to upgrade, but I'm not going to. And those people might say, hey, this isn't the thing that I want, but the thing that I want is twice as much in components, right? Even just the GPU is twice as much. Maybe this is what I do for now, and that maybe allows me to kick my upgrade 2 or 3 more years down the road. You're going to have people, as I found out recently in one of my last exchanges on Twitter, there are tons of people on potatoes, and Innate, has mentioned to me on multiple occasions that, Valve has said this, the Steam machine is better than 70% of the people who are, and I think it's true. I used to be one of these people who said, don't buy so much into the Steam hardware survey. A lot of that is cyber cafes, right, in Asia, and esports people buying 8 gigabyte graphics card because the first thing they do is turn everything down, and they're playing on 25-inch 1080p screens. Some of that may still be true, but I also now I drink the Kool-Aid and believe that like the Steam hardware survey is correct, and people like Innate, myself, and Slow-Mo are literally like the 2%, right, that are on the platform, right? I more firmly embrace that now. And so this, like I said, the Steam machine will be appealing to people. Those people don't need to see Half-Life 3 come along to buy it. I don't believe Half-Life 3 is coming out alongside the Steam machine. I definitely don't believe that it's going to be announced at the TGAs. There's absolutely no reason. I don't know. Valve has never done anything at the TGAs. They're not dependent on Jeff Keighley and his show, and his forum, and his venue. Like if Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo aren't, Valve is certainly not. Those people make somewhere between $10 billion and $17 billion a year with literally almost zero marketing. So, like I said, I don't believe there's some strident reason why they need to launch the game with the Steam machine. Maybe they will. They may do it. What I'm saying is they don't have to. And I also don't necessarily know that I believe that Half-Life 3 launching alongside the Steam machine changes the trajectory on its sales. Because again, who is Half-Life 3 going to be appealing to? Again, Innate, myself, Slow-Mo, the 2%, because we're going to be the people who have, like, they just demoed Half-Life with an RTX DLSS mod, and you're not going to be able to use that on the Steam machine because it's not going to have DLS, and it's not running an RTX GPU. It's running an AMD GPU. So, again, people on the Steam machine actually, quite honestly, won't even necessarily be the target audience for Half-Life 3. And again, that's the type of consumer that may get swept up in that are not necessarily people who buy $60 or $70 games either. So, the likelihood that this is indicating some type of Half-Life 3 thing, to me, is really, really, really unlikely. Quite honestly, my belief is this thing doesn't have anything to do with God of War or Half-Life 3, and is probably something else. Maybe I buy the Elden Ring part of it. It could be neither of those IPs. It could be entirely new IP. I actually think, I'm probably wrong, but I wonder if whatever is going on here in these pictures is actually indicating a mashup game of something weird, ancient, fantastical, demons, witches, whatever, actually arrives in modern times. And that what this game involves is a conflict between ancient forces in a modern setting, and that's why this thing is stapled to the California desert with the 29 Palms Highway running next to it. Because otherwise, I don't know why your leak, right, why your picture would be geomarked in California, right? Like, if it's an ancient event that happened in California, then I guess it would be Native Americans or Indians that would be the protagonists. But I'm leading in the direction that the protagonists are going to be modern military people, but they're going to be fighting some type of, ancient threat that is materialized in the present world. Otherwise, I don't understand like why these two pictures make sense together. But that could just be me. A few comments from Innate. He agrees that they don't have to launch it, and then mentions Half-Life 3 almost does more for them on the thought of coming out. Right. Yeah, it's just I've just heard so much of the assessment of the Steam machine to me from the other podcasts and stuff that I've listened to have all been from a very console-centric lens, with the supposition that Valve needs to do the same thing the consoles do, that Valve is trying to do the same thing consoles do, that if Valve doesn't do the same thing consoles do, then the Steam machine doesn't make sense. And I don't believe any of that is true. So we'll see how it goes. Let's go ahead and crunch through these last 4. I'll probably try and run through these pretty quick. Okay, item 6 in the rundown. The responsibility lies fully with us. Paradox writes down millions after Bloodlines 2 underperforms. This news story over on Game Developer by Chris Kerr. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, publisher Paradox Interactive, has written down, I think this is krona, 355 million krona, or $37.4 million in capitalized development costs after the long gestating sequel underperformed. The Swedish publisher said the write-down is based on an updated sales forecast made 30 days after the title launched. Paradox said it is pleased with the work of Bloodlines 2 developer Sumo Digital, which took charge of the project in 2023 after multiple studios had been relieved of development duties, but confirmed the title has fallen short of expectations. So I believe that this is because the game is not a great game. There is a running narrative out there that it's because of, this thing, is has a lot of diversity and inclusiveness in it, and other topics of social equity, and that's why it's not good. I also wonder. I'm loosely familiar with the whole vampire lore, Vampire the Masquerade lore. I never played the tabletop. I may have played the tabletop RPG like really, really briefly. I spent a lot of time in the first game, which also had a very storied history along the lines of Cyberpunk 2077 in terms of like it just came out and was not good. It eventually kind of got rescued by the mod community and actually went on to become one of the best games that you could play in terms of an RPG at the time, and really stuck to and honored the lore. I don't think that they've done as great a job with this, and so again, for a IP that is targeting that type of demographic, you obviously put yourself at risk if you don't honor the lore enough. I don't think it has to do with any notion of DEI, inclusiveness, woke, the whole go woke, go broke foolishness. I think it's just because they didn't execute this game well, and and I hope it doesn't create too big a hit for Paradox. Paradox is, I can't quite get my mouth to say the words that they're one of my favorite publishers, but I do spend a lot of, I love Age of Wonders. I love a lot of their 4X titles. And so a few times in the last few years, they've kind of stepped on the rake on a couple issues. This is yet another one. I forget who it was. They spun someone out. The City Skylines has been a problem. So I just hope these guys hold it together. One of the things that Rami Ismail mentioned in a couple of the talks that I've listened to him to is the publishers weathering adversity now are the publishers that have a shtick, right? That have an identity, that there's a style of game, a set of game. You can articulate who that publisher is and what they produce. This is why Annapurna, right, was a thing. This is why Devolver Digital is a thing. Those guys have certain types of properties that they normally publish, minus all the Annapurna drama and all that. And so Paradox is also one of those. They make 4X games. They go out and find 4X games. They go out and find studios doing 4X games and good ones and take them on for publishing. So I just hope this is not them coming off that, because I really like 4X games. Let's see. I think a few comments in chat from Techie3A. Paradox does good with 4X. They just need to learn what works for 4X. Does it, for RPG and such. Hot take, Half-Life 3 doesn't mean anything to me too. GTA. And I'm not that far down the path. Half-Life 3, I will play Half-Life 3 if Half-Life 3 comes out and Half-Life 3 is a good game. As I mentioned earlier in one of the segments about people who stand around waiting decades for something to show up, I'm not standing around waiting for Half-Life 3. It's just kind of weird to me. And I'm also not doing a looky-loo, gopher look every time somebody wanders by my windshield and say, oh, Half-Life 3 is coming out. I'm when Half-Life 3 gets here and it's published and I can buy it on Steam, then it makes a difference to me. All of the whatever, for all the rumors. Like I don't get it. GTA, I've been on record many times as saying I haven't played a GTA since Vice City. In general, I don't care about GTA. The only reason I care about GTA is because it will provide the technology and the engine to enable Red Dead Redemption 3, and that's what I care about. I'm like, hurry up and get GTA out so you can take a team and put them on Red Dead Redemption 3. That is the thing that matters to me. Next news story in the rundown. Get that right? Okay, there we go. AMD Ryzen 7 9850X3D sneaks into 3D Vcache lineup to dominate games. This news story over on Hot Hardware by Paul Lilly. AMD has officially launched the Ryzen 7 9850X3D, which up to this point has only been a rumored upcoming addition to the company's 3D Vcache chip family. It's a quiet launch without a press release, blog post, or even a blip on AMD's social media accounts. And the only reason we know it's real is because there is a dedicated support document for the new part on AMD's domain in France. The lack of virtual balloons and streamers could be a case of someone in France flipping the switch prematurely, or the plan may have been a low-key launch all along. Either way, we now have official confirmation that it's real. What we don't have, however, are confirmed specifications. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would be concerned about, I think, for this chip, I mean, there's no question that it's going to perform. It's going to be a great part. What I always want to know at this point with the Ryzen series, and particularly with the parts that have the 3D Vcache, is TDP. And I think this 120 watt TDP, was from a leak. That's the thing I want confirmed, because then that sets us up for understanding what AIOs support it. We're kind of also getting to a point where I don't worry about that much, because I always use a 360 millimeter AIO. I went through a very brief time where I was like, let me see what TDP is going to be, so I can either pick a 240 or a 360. Now I'm like, no, we don't even play that game. We don't even question it. You just always get a 360 millimeter AIO, and then you don't worry about it. But still interesting to know exactly, what that part is, because even despite whatever I do with AIOs, that's still going to start setting up things like, okay, what temperatures do I need to monitor right in Afterburner when I'm playing a game, and where is this chip officially considered hot or not, or what's normal. This is the 9850 X3D. I think we already have a 9950 X3D in the lineup, so this is a part that kind of fills in the gaps. And so for builders who are interested in maybe looking for something that is cheaper than a 9850 X3D, this will be for you. These 50 parts are in my mind, are for creators who both want almost as good graphical performance. I think the equivalent non-50 parts, so like the 9800 X3D, would be the part that you want if you want like absolutely the best in gaming in that band. But if you have concerns for like video editing and other productivity tasks that are associated with content creation, then you may want the 50 part. Out of 3 of my 5 machines, one of them has an X3D 00 X3D part. That's a machine that I run with a 7800 X3D, which is where I have my RTX 5080 now. 2 of them have a 50 part, so I've got one that runs a 5950X, and then the 7950X. I think this is an update in the SKU that I haven't kept up. I think those 50 parts, so there used to be 50 parts that were not X3D parts, they were just 50. Then I think this is an addition of X3D parts, and I forget when they started cutting those in, maybe in the 7000 series. TechieX says GTA 1 was the only one I had fun playing. I just tried to get as many cops on me. Ine mentions Fox has never played GTA. Priscilla has never played GTA fully through a campaign. She's excited for this one though. I've seen a protagonist counter, and then really a 360 radiator or bust. Yep. Okay, heading into the last 2 stories. I keep turning these off. I shouldn't. A Splinter Cell remake regains director who left for Battlefield 6 3 years ago. I think Naughty Dog also just got a creative director back who had gone out on a walkabout and recently came back as well. A Splinter Cell remake Regains director who left for Battlefield 6 years ago. David Gravel is back at Ubisoft and once again in charge of reviving Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell franchise. In late 2022, Splinter Cell remake director David Gravel announced that he was leaving Ubisoft after 11 years and going on a new adventure that led him to work on Battlefield 6 for EA. Now that adventure has taken Gravel back to Ubisoft as he reclaims his old job as the director of the Splinter Cell remake. I also don't know that I'm pronouncing his name correctly, so I'm saying Gravel. It may be Grivel. I don't know. Gravel announced his return to the Splinter Cell remake team on LinkedIn. Today, I'm very, very happy to announce that I'm rejoining Ubisoft Toronto as game director on the Splinter Cell remake, wrote Gravel, a very special team and project to me. Now, Casey Hudson left BioWare and came back, and we got Anthem, which had a lot of good ideas behind it, but unfortunately didn't deliver in its execution and dug itself into a bathtub that EA decided they were not willing to spend the money to get it out of it, which is unfortunate. I loved Anthem. I loved Anthem's potential. So, is this a reason to, exclaim in exuberance that this guy is back? I think, unfortunately, so first of all, I have not, as much as I track and keep up with Ubisoft, I'm not perfectly salient on the whole, what happened in, the transfer of who's captaining the Tom Clancy properties from Red Storm in North Carolina to Massive Entertainment. I'm not sure. So it's Ubisoft Toronto who has the Splinter Cell franchise now. I haven't tracked what other things that particular studio has done. So there's just tons of questions about the pedigree of every people who are working on this thing, and obviously tons of questions about Ubisoft's commitment to follow through on some of these IPs and everything that's going on between it and Tencent and the splitting up of the divisions and who's working where. This to me is just a data point to remember, a thing to keep track of, so that when we see the next thing go by, we can relate it to this chain of events. But this to me is not a reason to jump for joy about getting Splinter Cell anytime soon. I would almost say you will definitely be playing The Witcher 4, 5, and 6 before you will be playing a new Splinter Cell game in terms of a proper, AAA property and delivery. So the last news story in the rundown, your Arrow Lake PC may suddenly run faster. And here's why. Arrow Lake owners could see free speed gains thanks to software tweaks. This news story over on Digital Trends by Moina Paul. Remember when Intel launched its Arrow Lake S desktop processors, the Core Ultra 200S series, late last year? The reception was a bit lukewarm, but new data shows it's been quietly getting way better with age. According to some fresh benchmarks from Phoronix, the flagship Core Ultra 9 285K is now running about 9% faster on average under Linux than it did at launch. And here is the kicker. It's doing that while using 15% less power. Usually to get that kind of speed boost, you have to buy a whole new chip. This upgrade is entirely free. It comes down to a year's worth of software polish, better microcode, smarter kernel tuning, and compiler fixes. Essentially, the software finally caught up with the hardware. So that's great. I don't know that that chicken has already flown the coop. I think it has. There's reports here of sometimes you're getting a 14% improvement in frame rates. And there are more Arrow Lake S improvements coming down the road. There's an Arrow Lake refresh coming. Intel is gearing up for an Arrow Lake refresh in early 26. The good news, those new chips will likely ship with all these performance tweaks baked in from day one. For now, it looks like Arrow Lake is aging like fine wine, a rare and welcome surprise in an industry where we usually just throw out the old for the new. Cool. Somebody paid for a part and it's getting improved performance. But while, yes, we do typically throw out the old for the new, it is also normal that you buy a part and it gets performance increases. That's why we get driver updates. That's why there are improvements in the various APIs and DirectX. There are improvements in the NVIDIA drivers, and things tend to get better after you buy them. What we don't like is buying something and it being bad and then you getting improvements. And I've been saying this for the last couple months. I've been saying one of the things that I feel we need to stop doing is we need to stop heaping praise on companies because they fix something that they dorked up, because they put lipstick on a pig. Like, there's all of this hoopla about the Windows 11, you know, the fizzy, the gaming full screen experience, and I'm like, okay, that's great. Like, I'm sure somebody needs that, but let's not skate by the fact that people think this is great because Windows 11 is a travesty. It hasn't been good, right? I mean, I come from the days of Windows 98 SE, Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 10. Like, those were arguably good OSs. I wouldn't go so far as to say great. I would call them great in terms of stacking them right in stacked rankings against other versions of Windows, right? But like, Windows 11 has not been good. It has literally been a gouging pain for a lot of us. It has been as naggy as UAC was on Windows Vista, and in some ways it's worse. So they're not getting praise from me for doing the full screen experience. I'm sorry. And we've talked about this recently with regards to Amazon. I've talked about it with regards to like the Steam machine. I'm like, people want the Steam machine to do a thing, and I'm like, look at Amazon and look what they talk about, the lesson that they learned. And this is also what took Stadia out at the knees. What happens on the market is gamers tend to reject companies that provide products that solve problems that gamers have already figured out solutions for. Amazon was trying to solve a problem that for gamers they had already figured out solutions for. Stadia was trying to provide a solution to a thing gamers had already figured out. I get that Microsoft thinks that there's a lot of traction and uptake in cloud. It's very unclear what that is to me. Even, Paul Tassi and, Paul Thurrott, well, Paul Thurrott says this all the time. But, we always talk about okay, so there's a 45% increase in uptake of cloud gaming in, I won't say a third world country, but like in a market that's not particularly impactful. Like 45% from what? Like, are you saying you had one person playing there and now 45 people are playing there? I don't know that really moves the needle. So, where we are now in recency is that people have not resoundingly said that they are interested in cloud as a solution for gaming. Remote connectivity, yes, right? PlayStation players are saying, yeah, I'll pay $199 to get a portal and connect to my PlayStation remotely. And while there is some interest in the cloud capability of the portal, I don't believe that it's huge. Like, it's just that, oh, by the way, it's like, okay, that's nice. Like, I paid $199 for this thing and now it has a new capability. Cool. But yeah, I don't know that we should be heaping praise on companies for fixing a thing that stinks. Like, we talked about this on E2KG Sunday night. Like, part of the problem with the notion that Cyberpunk 2077 is now literally the thing that in its entirety sustained CD Projekt Red. Sure, there's a case study to look at that in terms of recovery, and esprit in the face of adversity, but let's not forget that CD Projekt Red screwed that up. That was their own mess, right? That was their own thing they had to recover from. Nobody did that to them, right? So they didn't come into the CD Projekt Red offices, right, and hold them at gunpoint and tell them to dork this thing up. They did that to themselves. So, it's great that Arrow Lake is getting these improvements. I'm not running around and handing out confetti at the Intel offices for them correcting a thing that they screwed up at the most inopportune time in the world. Ryzen has had them in a chokehold since day one, but Ryzen really came to the battlefield like armed to the teeth with the 9000 series and Intel. Now, admittedly, I will also say I feel like Intel, I won't say that they got a bad rap, but I also feel like those Intel chips were held up to scrutiny solely under the notion of gaming, and they were also chastised almost solely for the reason that they didn't have the same gaming chops as the comparative Ryzen chips. And I will say, okay, yes, that's true, but I also don't know that gaming is the sole measure of a chip, particularly for like I commented before, like if you're a content creator, and that's why I've bought those 50 series half-step chips, because I'm like, if I'm getting 89 to 92% of the same performance as the 100 series X3D chip, but I get better productivity and better content creation and better video processing, then I'll accept that trade-off. I don't need another 5 frames, right? These things already crank out more frames than my monitors can render, and my monitors are 165 hertz and 144 hertz monitors, right? So and if I get a game that's a UE5 turd, me having that 100 series X3D chip versus the 50 half-step chip, I don't really know that that's going to win the day. I don't think it's going to make that big a difference. Then you're juggling a matter of cost, and that is why I think those 100 series X3D chips are actually really more popular, is because they tend to be, I can't remember exactly, but I'll call it $50 to $100 less than the equivalent half-step 50 part that's next in line in the SKU list. So, but for people who did go Arrow Lake, if I was going to build last year, I would have gone Arrow Lake, because I wasn't worried about whatever they gave up to the Ryzen chip for performance. I think the Arrow Lake chips were significantly cheaper, so that's the route that I would have gone. But I didn't. So for people who did buy them, at least you're getting improved performance. So that is going to wrap it up for me for tonight. Thanks so much for everybody who swung through. I saw a lot more people come through here than I was expecting. For people who came through the live show chat, I appreciate you, Techie Geek, especially since you had to put some little ones to bed and then came back. Thrifty and Real Innate, I appreciate you guys. For anybody who wasn't able to attend the live show, please feel free to watch the archive version of this show on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. I will be doing these probably once a week. There'll be a couple times I do them twice a week, but I'm not on any regular schedule, so you'll see the word come out either on Blue Sky or just on the front page of the YouTube channel. So until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, play the games you like, come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Zeus from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.